Welcome to ArtsBridge, your connection to the arts in the Cincinnati area. I'm your host, Evans Mirages. Each week, we will get a glimpse of the arts and artists around town, regionally, and nationally. Let's get started. Cincinnati stone sculptor Karen Heil knew she was going to be an artist in kindergarten because the teacher would hold up her artwork in class as the example. However, it wasn't until years later that she actually got serious.
I never saw myself as a stone sculptor or any kind of a sculptor. So when my kids went to school, I decided to go to the Art Academy here in Cincinnati, and it was there that I was introduced to stone sculpture, and I was in my 30s at that point. I think what attracted me to stone carving and what I saw in it was that not only was it a challenge mentally, but physically. I went home tired, and I still do go home tired from the physicality of doing stone sculpture. Most of what I do in bas-relief stone carving is commissioned work. It's from either corporate America, hospitals, or people's private homes. My greatest joy comes from when they just say, do what you do. And then I can give them a narrative about what they're talking about based on natural forms that I gather from nature, flowers, leaves, even animals, birds.
To begin the process, Karen sees the piece in her mind and then must put it on paper for her clients.
My drawings are pathetic sometimes because I see it, but I can't put it on paper. That's not my medium. Chisel and stone is my medium. Once I have the drawing, I grid the drawing. It's a scaled drawing to match the size of the stone, and I transfer that drawing to the stone. And then I begin carving. I just take the edge of the chisel and I start outlining the form. Say it's a bird. It'll be like a scratch in the surface where I outline that form. That's gonna pop forward. That's the part that's gonna stick out. So everything surrounding that bird has to come off. Then there's a leaf. Then I have to take everything around that leaf off without losing the other leaves. This is thinking three-dimensionally, so you have to know which things are coming forward and which things are staying back. When I make a mistake, nobody knows it because a leaf can be just about any kind of shape you want to make it. The tools that I use now are all pneumatic, but when I began carving, it was all hammer and chisel like they did in the olden days, but it takes forever to get a piece finished. And so I was introduced into pneumatic tools with a special hammer. That's a very small version of a jackhammer in a street. So only the chisels don't lock in. You hand hold both pieces and you guide it. So you're working both hands, both arms at the same time. And you control the amount of pressure that comes through that air hose so you don't take off too much, or you can take off more by having more pressure come through. My stone that I use mostly at this point in my life is Indiana limestone. Most of it comes from Bedford, Indiana. I choose limestone, number one, because it's available. Number two, because it's soft. Number three, it wears well outdoors. And number four, it forces me to put a really good design in it.
SD1, Northern Kentucky's wastewater and stormwater utility, is using art to educate people about our precious resource, water. They commissioned Karen to create 3 sculptures: Water, Gift of the Earth; Water, Source of Life; and Water, Sculptor of the Land.
I actually went down to the quarries and I found these huge cores of stone that are probably 36 inches across. And I thought, wow, what are these? And they said, oh, that's just garbage. Those were core samples. They were each 5 feet tall, so we cut them in half. So we had these 4 pieces, and then there was going to be a fountain, so we had to core the centers out. So the title comes from Water, Sculptor of the Land, which the water cuts through the earth and reveals the fossils, which tells the history of the land, how many millions of years ago. And the fossils, some of them were carved, some of them were made out of terracotta clay. And that was a project I worked in collaboration with Alan Nairn, who is a Cincinnati potter now working at the Rookwood Pottery.
Having worked with stone for years, Karen has taken on a new medium, clay.
I had no idea what I was doing in clay, so I thought, how can I make clay more a part of me and me a part of the clay? So all of a sudden one day it just came to me, why not carve the clay? And then I found out too, because I have essential tremor, that I can't throw and pull clay. I can't throw clay because my hand shakes the whole way up. So I hire somebody to throw a basic vessel for me. And then I embellished it. I add the handles, the decorative handles to it. I add the stuff that make the beak. I focused on pictures. And then the pictures reminded me of birds. So now all I do are these vessels in clay that are birds. And once I figured that out, and I liked that I had this carved clay vessel, then I thought, something's not right. So then I decided I'll carve a base for it out of limestone. So then I brought my stone carving back into it. So now I'm conflicted between carving and making clay. But I found a way to keep the stone carving into my life by creating these vessels. So that's how that all got started. And right now the clay vessels are just occupying all my time. I can't imagine not doing this. I mean, the only way I won't do this is if I'm dead, because this is what I feel like I was born to do. It is my passion, and I think that's what my legacy is, to just fulfill your dreams by doing your passion, follow your bliss.
Karen won a national competition to create a sculpture for the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. Flight to Freedom is hanging there. Next time you go, check it out. And to see more of Karen's work, go to KarenHeil.com. What began in 1927 as the Cincinnati Institute of Fine Arts has evolved into a local arts powerhouse, ArtsWave. Steering the organization for the past 30 years is CEO Mary McCullough Hudson. She retired last summer, and I sat down with her at Coffee Emporium to talk about how her musical career got started and how she made her way to ArtsWave. I'd like us to take a journey back first, because one of the things I think is so special about your tenure in this position is that someone who has been so important in perpetuating the arts comes at it from the perspective originally as a performer. So when did the performing bug hit you as a kid, and how?
Oh my gosh. All right, so I went to see the movie musical of Music Man.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know, we're going way back. And bought the LP, the vinyl,
Right?
the day of the movie, came home and played it and knew every part, every word, and said, that's what I want to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's one thing to be enamored of something that you see. It's another thing to say, okay, well, so what can I do?
Yeah.
How did you find your voice?
I sang in choirs in school, and my junior high school music teacher said, too young to really be able to identify, but said, you know, I think there's a talent there and you need to try to groom it. So there was a voice teacher that they recommended I grew up in Hamilton, Ohio, in Hamilton, and so she taught me from the time I was, 14 or 15, until she reached the point and said, I've taken you as far as I can, and I think you need to go to CCM. Got a voice teacher at CCM, so my last 2 years in high school, I went there for voice lessons, drove from Hamilton to Cincinnati every week, and then enrolled at CCM and ended up staying there for both undergraduate and graduate work.
Initially, were your sights set on opera or musical theater, or were you not trying to decide which one was going to suit you more?
I think it was, opera was suiting me more, my voice. I don't think I was ever an ingenue, even when I was like 15. So I was always kind of drawn to the character roles. I was a mezzo, but I I look back at it as a really important training ground for what I ended up doing, which is I do a lot of presentations. And so how do you compel an audience and bring an audience with you and kind of read how they're reacting to what you're saying and make corrections if you need to. So I thought it was, so I think even though I didn't end up making a career out of that, I always felt that that was enormously positive base.
And one of the things that I'm always amazed by with people who start out as performers and go successfully into administration is something that they bring to their work is something that was ingrained to them as performers if they were even moderately successful, which is a fierce ability to focus. When you're standing on that stage having to sing a title role in an opera or the major mezzo-soprano solo in an oratorio, you can't let your mind wander for a millisecond or else you'll fail. And one of the things that I always love when I'm working with people who have been performers is that they have a laser beam ability to focus. And I'm sure that's helped you a lot in your work.
It has, and it's also been so much fun because I agree with you and I look for that. And while you see that in the arts, I also am fortunate enough to have worked with some of the top business and professional leaders in this community, and they have that same ability.
So what tempted you to, as it were, get on the horse yourself and say, all right, look, I'm a good performer. I don't think I want a career in this rough and tumble world of opera. This seems to appeal to me. What was the tipping point? Because I know you took a sort of an entry-level job at the Fine Arts Fund.
I did.
Then you never left.
You know, yeah, it's really interesting. I started working, Paul Sittenfeld was then the executive director,
Right.
Paul, and I had actually sung a gig on behalf of the opera for the Fine Arts Fund the spring before for a campaign, and so met a couple of the staff people. And when I heard there was an open, well, fast forward, my husband and I not yet husband, but
You and Greg were dating
Right.
at that point.
right, and we did the, do we want to go to New York and starve in a garret thing. And that took about a
5 minutes,
nanosecond
yeah.
to say, I just
No.
don't think we're built for that. And so then we said, okay, so we better get serious about what are we going to do? Because he said, look, I've got a master's degree in voice. I have no marketable skills, so start at the ground floor, whatever. Variety of configurations then led me to this job opening at the Fine Arts Fund. And Paul interviewed and said, we really need someone to, do some support functions for 6 months. If you can stick with us through that, then I'll help you find something. And so,
Very
and
generous.
true to his word, after 6 months, he said, look, we're creating a new position here, community relations coordinator, one of those invented kinds of things.
Something that I know you have been incredibly strong about in your tenure as CEO of Artsway is this idea of collaboration across genres. And when I go to other cities and I talk about some of the things we do here across our art forms, I get a lot of head scratching because they say, how can you coordinate that? And my answer often is, well, we're just big enough to have the financial capital to pull it off, but we're also just small enough to know that we really can collaborate because the town is not so large and we're not so disparate in our interests that we can't come to some sort of common ground.
That's right. Well, it's one of the things that we've talked a lot about in the last few years with this idea of trying to really get very disciplined and serious about how do we measure that community public impact of the arts. And the fact is that Cincinnati is leading the way in how we're approaching this. And I've said to me, we're the perfect laboratory. We have the size and scale and institutional respect of our larger arts organizations to attract the kind of thought leadership that you represent and your colleagues represent in this community. So you have people that really think deeply about the work and how we connect and engage. And yet, as you say, we're a small enough market that we can't do it by ourselves. We have to work collectively. But the fact that we meet, monthly with the leaders of these arts and cultural organizations and really talk about common goals and common vision for the community, not just for our institution, but what do we want this community to be like? I think that is remarkable and uniquely Cincinnati.
This is just the beginning of our conversation. Tune in next week for the conclusion. The Picking Copper Kettle Company makes its home in Bucyrus. They started building apple butter kettles in 1874. These handmade kettles are also used by some of the major orchestras in the United States.
We're in D Picking Company in Bucyrus, Ohio, and this is a copper kettle factory. The building was built in 1873 for $1,675. They started making apple butter kettles in 1874. So we've been making apple butter kettles in this building for 139 years. Nobody in Ohio made apple butter kettles in the 1800s. So the only place you could get them was Lancaster, Pennsylvania. There was a German-Dutch settlement there, and they made the copper kettles. So the Pickings had a hardware store, and they wanted to sell the apple butter kettles.
My father started working for the family at the hardware store, and then he decided that he liked the copper kettle idea better than the hardware, and so he moved his interest into this building and to this activity here.
We start with a flat sheet of copper, and then we use a dovetail clamp. We use brass shavings, borax, and water, and we put that down the seam, and we light the forge, which starts around 1300 degrees. That melts the brass through, and then we hammer that. We're the only company left in the United States that hammers the whole kettle, and it's called planishing there. And the planishing hardens it, it brightens it, and we make timpani shells for most of the major orchestras in the United States. And being hard copper, it gives them a deeper bass tone. There's no other place in the United States that does it this way. So if you want to learn, you have to come here, and you have to be an apprentice. Start you out a little bit at a time, and it takes around 6 months to a year to learn the whole craft. But you're not a coppersmith until you can start with a piece of copper and work it all the way through and make a kettle. Then you become a coppersmith.
Heritage, as far as this business is concerned, began when I was born, when my father and mother were dragging me down here while Dad worked at night, and that sort of thing. So I feel sort of home in this particular place. And the thing I like most is the men that I have working for me.
Well, Helen's father, I worked for him for 5 years. I came here and he was hiring apprentices. So I was here for 90 days, and then they asked me to stay, and I've been here ever since.
My father had lots of friends, and people admired him a great deal, and so people got to knowing him, and that was important. He sat here, and when a lot of people came to see him because they liked him, they liked what he did, they loved the elephants, they loved his response to them. The elephants were the history of my father, who as a kid loved elephants. And a town like this, a little circus would come in, there he was, behind the elephant, or around an elephant. And then he just got so, as he got older, he would seek out circuses that had an elephant, and then he would give the circus owner some money, and he would ride the elephant during one of the parades around the circus tent. He would ride that, and was doing that when he was over 100. So you can see he kind of liked what he was doing. Yeah, loved it.
This is part of a lost art, and if this goes out of business, then there'll be something missing. The candy companies won't have the copper kettles there, and the tradition will die there. So if we keep people interested in it, we can keep this craft going for generations to see all the time.
It doesn't make any difference to me if I sell a lot of things. If I sell few things to people who really like it and leave it and want it, that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's it.
The place is like stepping back in time. So by coming in here, you're going to see something that you won't see anywhere else.
To learn more about the Kettle Company, go to dpicking.net. Dale Chihuly has taken the ancient Italian art form of glassblowing and transformed it into a large-scale sculpture practice. We enter this brightly colored world at the Phoenix Desert Botanical Garden and learn how cacti and art connect.
It's called the Sapphire Star. More than 700 blue to clear spires begin the Chihuly in the garden exhibit.
The colors are so vibrant. There's no other artist in glass that's doing what Dale Chihuly is doing.
What he's doing in Phoenix is generating oohs, ahs, and questions.
So what's a beluga?
I guess they kind of look like whales.
So do you think it's like this big, like, fish hook?
Each piece, from this chandelier to the scarlet and yellow icicle tower, is created by a team of glass blowers with final approval coming from Dale Chihuly.
He is probably the most successful artist to exhibit in gardens around the world. But there is nowhere that he has exhibited where he has our plant collection, the beautiful light that the desert has, and then the wonderful vistas and backdrops. It's just a different space for him to see his work.
And that's why McGinn says Phoenix is the only garden to host 2 Chihuly exhibits. The first was in 2008.
And we had over 500,000 people visit the garden in 6 months, which was a record for us.
This exhibit features 21 installations spread across 55 acres.
Chihuly's signature in every show that I've ever seen, whether it's a fine art museum or a garden, is a boat. He's a collector of boats. He collects many, many things, but one of the things he's an avid collector of are these antique wooden boats. This boat was actually a tender. It dates back to the 1800s, so they're quite fragile when they come. And he loves to put what he calls the millefiori, which is just this wonderful showcase of different shapes and colors of glass into the boat.
For more than a year, Chihuly and his team worked with garden staff to pick the best spots. Moving the artwork from Chihuly's studio in Seattle to a canvas in the desert took patience.
The glass came in 6 tractor-trailer trucks over the course of 3 days. They come in hundreds of boxes, and each box contains pieces of each of the installations. Chihuly sends a team of 12 down to help us through the installation. They actually do the physical installation itself, and it took us about 2 weeks to get it all installed. The sun was the largest installation. It took the longest to install, about 3.5 days. It took a team of 5 Chihuly installers, and it has 2,000 pieces of glass.
Some colors and shapes are so striking you can't miss them, like these yellow herons.
Very graceful, and they're sitting in the among herbs. So as you're standing and looking at the piece, you're also smelling lavender and thyme. There's a chocolate flower. So it's just this wonderful sensory experience.
Other pieces blend in so well you might mistake them for desert plants.
You could stand here for 10 minutes and watch people, they'll walk right by it.
But when the sun goes down, McKinn says every piece becomes a star.
At night, it's a completely different show. All the sculptures are lit, and we have, going up the Garden Butte, we have 26 neon panels, so the garden is just glowing at night.
Keeping all this glass shiny requires the white glove treatment. It takes about 10 hours each week.
The best thing I hear a lot is, wow, look at that. They really love that. But for us, you know, we are about being the garden, and to have visitors come in and they'll say, wow, look at that, and then they'll go, and look at that plant. You know, that is really cool. Or I hear often just walking around, you know, I didn't know this place was here, or I didn't know how beautiful the desert could be.